Aileen Wuornos, a name that sends chills down the spine, was not born a monster, but a series of tragic events sculpted her into one. Our story begins in the heartland of America, Michigan, during the cold winter of 1956. A child named Aileen was born into a world of uncertainty and instability. Her parents, mere teenagers themselves, were ill-equipped to raise a child and soon abandoned her, leaving her in the care of her grandparents. The home she grew up in was far from a haven of love and security. Instead, it was a breeding ground for abuse and neglect. Aileen's grandfather was a harsh and violent man, and her grandmother turned a blind eye to the torment that unfolded within their walls. This was Aileen's introduction to the world, a world where innocence was stolen, and pain was a constant companion. As Aileen grew older, her spirit of rebellion began to flicker, a desperate attempt to regain some control in her life. She was expelled from school at a young age, a clear sign that she was straying off the beaten path. The rebellious flame within her only grew fiercer, pushing her further into the world of crime. At the tender age of 15, Aileen began selling her body, an act born out of desperation and survival. Prostitution became her means of getting by, a grim testament to the harsh realities of her life. It was during these early years that the seeds of the monster within her began to take root. Aileen's story is not one of evil born, but of evil made. She was a product of her environment, a tragic example of how a life steeped in abuse and neglect can twist and warp a person's soul. Raised in a world of chaos, Aileen's path was paved with hardship and despair from an early age. As Aileen Wuornos stepped into adulthood, her life took a darker turn, pulling her deeper into the abyss of crime. The spiral began with a series of misdemeanors. Aileen's first brush with the law came when she was arrested for driving under the influence. But this was merely a prelude to a life that would soon be dominated by more serious criminal activities. The thrill of danger and the lure of easy money proved too strong for Aileen to resist. Her criminal record quickly expanded to include charges as serious as firing a weapon from a moving vehicle. A dangerous cocktail of recklessness and desperation, Aileen seemed to have a knack for finding herself on the wrong side of the law. The thrill of the chase, the adrenaline rush of the escape, it was all part of the allure for her. As the years passed, her crimes escalated. Armed robberies became her modus operandi. She moved from state to state, living a drifting lifestyle, always one step ahead of the law. But the freedom she sought was a mirage. The more she ran, the tighter the noose of her past transgressions tightened around her. Aileen's inability to escape her criminal tendencies was a testament to the power of her circumstances. She was a product of her environment, a victim of her own decisions. A life of crime was all she knew, and it was a path she seemed destined to follow. She lived her life like a fugitive, constantly on the move, always looking over her shoulder. Yet, even as she darted from one place to the next, a sense of impending doom hung over her. It was as if she was running not just from the law, but also from herself. The spiral of crime was a vortex that sucked Aileen in, refusing to let go. Every decision she made, every path she took, led her deeper into its clutches. It was a whirlwind of chaos and instability, a storm that was constantly brewing, threatening to erupt at any moment. Aileen's life was a whirlwind of crime and instability, a storm that was about to unleash its full fury. The year 1989 marked the beginning of a horrifying chapter in Aileen Wuornos' life, a chapter stained with the blood of innocent victims. In the span of just 12 months, Aileen's path would cross with 7 unsuspecting men, each meeting a grim end on the desolate highways of Florida. The first was Richard Mallory, a 51-year-old electronics store owner with an unfortunate fate. Aileen's method was chillingly simple, yet effective. She'd play the damsel in distress, luring in her victims under the guise of needing help. Once they were within her grasp, she would shoot them at point-blank range, leaving them no chance of survival. As the months rolled on, the body count rose. David Spears, Charles Carskadden, Peter Seams, Troy Burris, Charles Humphreys, Walter Antonio, all fell victim to Aileen's deadly encounters. Each man was shot several times, their bodies discarded like unwanted refuse. Despite the brutality of her actions, Aileen maintained a twisted sense of justification. In her mind, she was not a murderer, but a victim fighting back. Aileen claimed her actions were in self-defense, a desperate response to attempted rape. She painted a picture of herself as a tormented soul, fighting off the unwanted advances of predatory men. Yet the ferocity of her attacks suggested a deeper, more complex motive. Was it a manifestation of her traumatic past, a desperate need for control, or just cold-blooded murder? The debate rages on. As the year came to a close, 7 men had lost their lives to this highway predator. Men who had families, loved ones, dreams and aspirations, their lives brutally snuffed out in a moment of terrifying violence. The highways of Florida had become a hunting ground for a woman with a troubled past and a lethal present. 7 men fell prey to Aileen's wrath, their lives brutally snuffed out on the highways of Florida. In 1991, Aileen's reign of terror came to a screeching halt. The law had finally caught up with her. As the net closed in, the infamous biker bar, the last resort, became the unlikely stage for the end of Aileen's murderous spree. It was a typical day in the bar when the law enforcement officers walked in, their gazes set on one person. Aileen Wuornos, the woman whose face had been splashed across the news, was finally in handcuffs. But her capture wasn't solely the work of diligent law enforcement. The twist in the tale was that of her lover, Tyria Moore. Tyria had been with Aileen through thick and thin, but as the noose tightened, she found herself at a crossroads. Striking a deal with the police, Tyria agreed to elicit a confession from Aileen, a confession that would seal Aileen's fate. The phone call between the two was tense, laden with emotion. Aileen, unaware of Tyria's deal with the police, finally confessed to the murders. The cat was out of the bag, and there was no going back. A media frenzy followed. Aileen Wuornos, the woman who had been living on the fringe of society, was now under the glaring spotlight. Her face was on every news channel, her story dissected by every talk show host. The confessions, the trials, the sensational headlines, it was a circus, with Aileen as the unwilling ringleader. The trials were a spectacle, with Aileen's erratic behavior only adding fuel to the fire. Her confessions, as chilling as they were, painted a picture of a woman who had been pushed to the edge. She claimed self-defense, but the evidence was stacked against her. The jury deliberated, the verdicts rolled in, and one by one, Aileen was found guilty. Aileen was cornered, her horrifying deeds laid bare for the world to see. The wheels of justice churned relentlessly, leading Aileen Wuornos to the final stop on her tragic journey: death row. Aileen, a woman whose life was marred by hardship, found herself in the cold, sterile confines of Florida's Broward Correctional Institution, awaiting her fate. Her time on death row was marked by erratic and unpredictable behavior. She vacillated between expressions of remorse and defiance, a stark reflection of her turbulent life. Aileen claimed to have killed in self-defense, but her pleas fell on deaf ears. Even as she sat on death row, she continued to make headlines, her story a chilling reminder of the darkness lurking in the shadows of society. In 2002, after a decade on death row, Aileen's journey came to an end. She was executed by lethal injection, her final words a chilling mix of anger and despair. "I'd just like to say I'm sailing with the Rock, and I'll be back like Independence Day with Jesus June 6th, like the movie. Big mothership and all. I'll be back." Aileen's death did not end the controversy that swirled around her case. Her life, marked by abuse, mental illness, and a system that failed her at every turn, sparked a heated debate about the death penalty that continues to this day. Critics argued that her execution was a symptom of a broken system, one that failed to consider the circumstances of her life and the role they played in her descent into crime. Advocates for the death penalty, on the other hand, argued that her crimes were too heinous, her actions too unforgivable, for any other outcome. Aileen Wuornos' life ended with a lethal injection, closing the book on one of America's most notorious female serial killers. Yet, her story lives on, a chilling reminder of the darkness that can breed within the cracks of society, and the controversial legacy of the death penalty in America.